Hello and welcome. On the show today, I'm going to do a little something different. I'm going to be reading from my book, which I will share with you in just a moment. While I'm doing that, I'll be enjoying the last bit that I have of Conduit's Myanmar. And then next time I'll probably be having their Spring Blossom. So, get a link to that below. Now, the book that I'm reading from is one of my favorites. The Monk of Mokha. This is the story of Mokhtar al-Khanshali, written by Dave Eggers. I recommend this book to everyone. It's largely focused around the events transpiring that led Mokhtar to create the company that he now has called Port of Mokha, and a lot of the drama and challenges around that. I've interviewed Mokhtar, written about him multiple times in the magazine, and of course I've talked about this book before on the series here, but I thought it would be fun to read from the book, just kind of want to read a chapter. And this, the chapter I'm going to read is kind of the starting discovery point of Mokhtar's journey into coffee. The book is broken up into different sections. The beginning part is more about Mokhtar and his childhood and growing up and what leads him to being the person that went on this journey. And then we learn about how things got started, and then of course the sort of core story / challenge that brought him to creating Port of Mokha. Anyways, highly recommend this book. Definitely get it, read it, enjoy it. I'll link to it below. The Monk of Mokha. This is chapter 10, The Statue. Miriam texted one day. "You ever look across the street?" she asked. Mokhtar didn't know what she was talking about. "Across the street, there's a statue of a Yemeni dude drinking a big cup of coffee," she told him. She just made a delivery from her dad's deli to the building across the street from the Infinity, and in the courtyard she saw an enormous statue of a man in a thobe with a giant mug lifted to his lips. "That's got to mean something," she said. "Maybe this is your thing." What she meant was, "You're 25, Mokhtar. Pick a direction in your life." He'd been working 120 feet away from the statue, but he'd never seen it. It was enormous, about 20 feet tall. The man was in mid-stride, drinking from a giant cup of coffee. Mokhtar wasn't sure about its historical accuracy. The man seemed to be some mashup of Ethiopian and Yemeni. And why were there cute little flowers all over his thobe? It looked like he was wearing a shower curtain, or muumuu. No self-respecting Arab would wear flowers all over his thobe. But Mokhtar walked into the building, into the lobby, across the street from his own lobby, and an encompassing history of coffee in the United States was presented in framed photos and captions. The building had been built by the Hills brothers, Austin and R.W., who in the late 1800s set up a coffee importing business called Arabian Coffee and Spice Mills. The brothers brought beans to California from around the world and roasted them for distribution all over the West. But freshness was a challenge. Every day on oceans or rails and roads, the coffee grew staler. This changed in 1900, when R.W. stumbled upon a way to remove the air from packaging. This became known as vacuum packing, and kept coffee beans fresher for longer, and soon revolutionized the coffee business. The Hills brothers became phenomenally successful and were instrumental in popularizing coffee in the United States. The graphic version of the statue became their well-known logo, and the company thrived independently for 100 years. Eventually, long after the brothers died and ceded the company to descendants and strangers, Hills Brothers was sold to Nestle, who sold it to Sara Lee, who sold it to Massimo Zanetti Beverage USA. The company left San Francisco in 1997, moving its headquarters downstate to Glendale. But the statue remained, and Mokhtar left the courtyard in a daze. Coffee and Yemen. Some ghost of a memory passed through him. That night on Treasure Island, he mentioned the statue to his mother. She laughed. "We've had coffee in our family for hundreds of years," she said. "Don't you remember your grandfather's house in Ib?" He had coffee trees in his yard. He still got them. Don't you know Yemenis were the first to export coffee? Yemenis basically invented coffee. You didn't know this? Mokhtar went on a research binge. At home, on his phone, he dove in and quickly encountered a long-running debate about the origins of coffee and the dual claims between Ethiopia and Yemen to its discovery. There was widespread agreement that the earliest origin myth involved an Ethiopian shepherd named Kaldi. Apparently, Kaldi was far afield with his sheep, allowing them to graze on any vegetation they could find. Every night he slept near them, and all was peaceful until late one night when he expected them to be resting. He found that his sheep were still up and about. More than up and about, they were jumping, prancing, braying. Kaldi was mystified. He thought they might be possessed, but soon it became clear that they were eating beans from the bushes nearby. These were coffee beans, and when Kaldi ate the beans himself, they had the same effect on him. He was shot through with new vigor and mental acuity. He had discovered the coffee bean. Wait, no. Not coffee beans, Mokhtar noted. The goats had been eating coffee fruit. Coffee beans were inside the coffee fruit, which grew on lush green bushes. At its most ripe, the coffee fruit was red and looked like a grape. Mokhtar saw the photos online. Piles of red cherries like huge ruby red beads. Coffee was a fruit! Mokhtar remembered this, plucking red cherries from a small tree in his grandfather's garden. The cherry could be eaten. He remembered eating the flesh of the fruit, which was sweet, and then spitting out the seeds. The seeds were the coffee. It all made sense now. Coffee was a fruit from a tree that usually bloomed once a year, and inside each fruit was the coffee bean. And the two halves of the bean were what we typically saw, the tiny bean, oval, and with a stripe of concavity down the middle. Two halves of a bean wrapped inside a fleshy fruit the size of a grape. But first the bean had to be separated from the fruit. There was the red skin, then the white flesh. Then, attached to the beans was the mucilage, and then the silver skin. The bean inside was green, sometimes yellow, and hard like any seed. A coffee tree could be grown from any unroasted coffee bean, of course. Did anyone know this or remember this? If Mokhtar didn't know any of this, who did? And who knew about the Yemeni role in it all? Few knew coffee had been born in Arabia. There were two kinds of coffee, Robusta and Arabica. But it was Arabica that was considered far superior in taste, and it was Arabica because it was born in Arabia, specifically in what the Romans had called Arabia Felix, Happy Arabia. This was Yemen. According to legend, it was in Mokha, a port city on the Yemeni coast, that the bean first brewed. For centuries after Kaldi, the shepherd had come and gone. Ethiopians chewed the beans and made weak tea from them, but it was Ali ibn Omar al-Shadili, a Sufi holy monk living in Mokha, who first brewed the bean into a semblance of what we now recognize as coffee, then known as kawa. He and his fellow Sufi monks used the beverage in their ceremonies celebrating God, which lasted long into the night. The coffee helped bring them to a kind of religious ecstasy and because the Sufis were travelers, they brought coffee to all corners of North Africa and the Middle East. The Turks turned kawa into kave, which became, in other languages, coffee. Al-Shadili became known as the Monk of Mokha, and Mokha became the primary point of departure for all the coffee grown in Yemen and destined for faraway markets. Mokha itself was a barren and dry coastal area, not suited for coffee cultivation, but nevertheless the word mocha became synonymous with coffee. The coffee was grown in the interior of the country in the mountains, using ingenious irrigation and terraces. The cherries were brought to Mokha for processing and export, and Mokha became a thriving commercial center, not just for coffee, but for other fruits and goods too. But coffee drove trade traffic to the port and was considered so valuable that exporting coffee plants was a crime. Men had been arrested and executed for the high treason of trying to leave port with a seedling. The first coffee houses, called kava khana, appeared throughout Arabia and were known for lively discussions, for music, and in some cases activities frowned upon in various quarters, prostitution, gambling, and criticism of local government. Coffee houses were often closed by rulers who saw in them the beginnings of uprisings. In 1511, Tahir Bey, then the governor of Mecca, got wind that verses lampooning him had originated at coffee houses, so he decreed that all coffee houses be closed. But the ban didn't last long. The demand was too great. Who knew all this? Mokhtar wondered. He could ask anyone on the street where coffee had been born, and they might say Paris, they might say Africa, they might say Colombia or Java, but who would say Yemen? What the world knew about Yemen now was terrorism and drones. Since the bombing of the USS Cole off the coast of Aden, Mokhtar had seen his parents' country devolve from happy Arabia to what some considered one of the world's most menacing places. Home to burgeoning Al-Qaeda and ISIS cells, and the relentless American drone strikes meant to neutralize those threats. And the coffee trade in Yemen was all but finished. Though Ethiopia had been home to the first coffee bush and Yemen home to the first cultivation and organized coffee trade, in the last 50 years, Ethiopia had come to dominate the region. Ethiopia was now the fourth largest producer in the world, while Yemen was all but forgotten, its exports negligible and considered of wildly unpredictable quality. In the mid-1800s, Yemen exported 75,000 tons of coffee a year, and by the 21st century produced only 11,000. And only about 4% of that was specialty coffee quality. And beyond the quality issues, Yemen was far more difficult for Western travelers. The mountainous coffee-growing regions were informally governed by local tribes and militias, whose movements were generally precarious for visitors, exporters, anyone. Given the choice between trading with the Ethiopians and the Yemenis, most coffee specialists found Ethiopia a far easier and safer bet. The second factor was khat. Mokhtar knew khat, enjoyed khat. Khat was illegal in the United States, but in Yemen it was a central part of daily life for virtually every man. A long leaf that, when chewed in significant quantities, provided a mild narcotic effect. Khat grew in similar climates to coffee, but was far more profitable. The incentive, then, for any Yemeni farmer to grow coffee was negligible. Most of it was exported to Saudi Arabia for a middling profit, while khat garnered high prices and was sold locally. Given the realities of the market, coffee had been relegated to a relatively small group of passionate but ill-trained Yemeni farmers. The training was the last and most important factor. Because it wasn't profitable for most farmers, the careful process for the cultivation and harvesting of high-quality coffee in Yemen had been long lost. Now it was picked and stored without great care, and Yemeni coffee, though it was the world's first ever cultivated, was known to be inferior to most or all other coffees in the world. That is the end of chapter 10, and that kind of kicks off the start of Mokhtar's journey. Again, highly recommend you get this book, The Monk of Mokha. Enjoy the whole story. It's very enlightening to the world of coffee as we know it today, and a bit of the history as well, where things are coming from, and perhaps where things are going as well. So I will link to The Monk of Mokha below. Get it, enjoy it. And I'd be curious to hear what you think about this kind of video. There are plenty of other interesting books and such, and different things I could read from, if that's of interest. So this has been Cover Joe. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts below in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.